The dust never stopped swirling in Alta, Utah. And neither did the whispers about Zelda Norton's crooked spine that bent her body like a windswept juniper clinging to a mountainside. She had learned long ago to keep her eyes on the ground when she walked through town, her basket of fresh baked bread clutched against her chest, her shoulders hunched not just from the curve in her back, but from the weight of 1,000 cruel stares. It was 1878. And the silver mines had brought rough men and rougher women to this high mountain settlement, people who had no patience for anything that looked different or weak. Zelda was 22 years old, and she had spent every one of those years learning that beauty was a currency she would never possess, that love was a dream reserved for women whose bodies grew straight and tall. The morning started like any other, with Zelda rising before dawn to knead dough in the cramped kitchen behind her father's bakery. Her father, Thomas Norton, had died 2 winters ago from lung fever, leaving her to run the business alone. Her mother had passed when Zelda was just a child, leaving behind only hazy memories of gentle hands and soft lullabies. The bakery was all Zelda had now, the only thing that gave her purpose beyond simply existing. She worked harder than anyone else in town, her twisted body moving with surprising efficiency as she shaped loaves and rolled out pastries, her hands strong and capable even if her spine was not. She loaded the bread into her basket just as the first light touched the peaks of the Wasatch Mountains, painting them gold and pink. The walk to the mercantile was only 3 blocks, but it felt like 3 miles every single time. She stepped out into the morning chill, her breath forming clouds in the thin mountain air, and made her way down the muddy street. Alta sat at nearly 9,000 feet elevation, and even in late summer, the mornings carried a bite that reminded everyone winter was never far away. "Look at that hunchback girl," a voice called out from the porch of the Silver Queen Saloon. Zelda recognized the speaker as Margaret Finch, a woman who worked the tables and thought herself better than everyone else because she had smooth skin and a straight back. How does she even walk carrying all that bread? Surprised she doesn't just tip right over. Laughter erupted from the group of miners and gamblers who had been up all night. Zelda kept walking, her face burning, her fingers white-knuckled on the basket handle. She had heard worse. She heard worse almost every day, but the words still cut, still left wounds that never quite healed. "Someone ought to put that creature out of her misery," another voice added, this one belonging to a man Zelda did not recognize. "Ain't natural looking like that." She walked faster, her uneven gait becoming more pronounced in her haste. The basket bumped against her hip, against the curve of her spine that jutted out like a question mark asking why, always why. She was nearly to the mercantile when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her, slow and steady. A horse and rider were approaching, and she moved to the side of the street to let them pass, but instead the rider stopped right beside her. "Morning, miss," a deep voice said, warm as summer honey despite the cool air. "Those folks back there giving you trouble?" Zelda dared to glance up, and found herself looking into the kindest eyes she had ever seen. The man sitting astride a paint horse was young, maybe 25 or 26, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly under the brim of his hat. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, dusty chaps over worn denims, a vest over a faded blue shirt, and a kerchief tied loosely around his neck. But it was his face that caught her attention, the way his mouth curved into a gentle smile that held no mockery, only genuine concern. "I'm fine," Zelda said quickly, looking back down at the ground. She did not want his pity. She did not want anything from him except to be left alone. "Thank you for your concern, but I'm just fine." "Name's Fletcher Cain," the cowboy said, not taking the hint. He swung down from his horse with easy grace, landing in the mud beside her. Just rode in from Colorado. Got hired on at the Bennington Ranch about 10 miles south. Figured I'd come into town for supplies before heading out there. Zelda nodded, still not looking at him, still waiting for the inevitable moment when he would really see her, when his kind eyes would fill with disgust or pity or both. "Good luck to you then," she said, trying to move past him toward the mercantile. But Fletcher Cain was not done talking. He fell into step beside her, leading his horse by the reins, matching his long stride to her shorter, uneven one. "What's your name?" he asked. "If you don't mind my asking." "Zelda Norton," she replied, because refusing to answer seemed ruder than just giving him what he wanted so he would leave her alone. "I run the bakery." "The bakery," Fletcher repeated, and there was something like approval in his voice. "So you made all this bread yourself? That's impressive." "I haven't had decent bread in months. Been living on hardtack and jerky since I left Wyoming." Despite herself, Zelda felt a small flutter of pride. Her bread was good, the best in Alta if she was being honest with herself. It was the one thing she could do better than anyone else, the one skill that could not be diminished by her crooked spine. "I bake every morning," she said. "Deliver to the mercantile and the hotel. Must keep you busy," Fletcher said. They had reached the mercantile now, and he held the door open for her, a gesture so automatic and courteous that it took Zelda by surprise. Most men pretended not to see her at all, much less held doors for her like she was a proper lady. Inside, the mercantile was dim and cluttered, smelling of coffee and leather and the sweet tang of dried apples. Old Samuel Wright, who ran the place, looked up from his ledger and nodded at Zelda. "Morning, Zelda. Got the usual for me?" "Yes, sir," she said, carrying her basket to the counter. 6 loaves of white, 6 of wheat, and a dozen sweet rolls." Samuel inspected the bread with the eye of a man who had been doing this for years, then counted out her payment in coins that clinked heavily into her palm. It was not much, but it was enough to keep her fed and the bakery supplied with flour and sugar and salt. She tucked the money into the pocket of her apron and turned to leave, only to find Fletcher Cain still standing there, watching her with those thoughtful eyes. "Could I buy one of those sweet rolls from you directly?" he asked. "Before they all get snatched up," Samuel waved a hand. "Go ahead, son. I haven't paid her yet for those anyway." Zelda reached into the basket and pulled out one of the cinnamon sugar rolls she had made fresh that morning, wrapped in a clean cloth. Fletcher produced a coin and pressed it into her hand, his fingers rough with calluses but surprisingly gentle. His hand lingered just a moment longer than necessary, and Zelda felt heat rise to her cheeks. She pulled away quickly, shoving the coin into her pocket without looking at it. "Thank you," Fletcher said, unwrapping the roll and taking a bite right there in the store. His eyes widened and he made a sound of genuine pleasure. "Lord have mercy, that's good. That's the best thing I've tasted in years." "It's just a sweet roll," Zelda mumbled, but she felt that flutter of pride again, stronger this time. She ducked her head and hurried toward the door, desperate to escape before he could say anything else, before he could ask questions or worse, before he could really look at her and see what everyone else saw. But as she stepped back out into the morning light, she heard him call after her. "Miss Norton, will you be here tomorrow? I'd like to buy more of your baking if that's all right." Zelda did not answer. She just kept walking, her heart pounding in a way that felt dangerous and foolish. Men like Fletcher Cain did not take interest in women like her. He was being kind, that was all, the way someone might be kind to a stray dog or a wounded bird. She could not let herself think it was anything more than that. She had learned that lesson too many times already. The rest of the day passed in its usual rhythm. She delivered bread to the hotel. where the owner's wife made a point of counting every single roll to make sure Zelda had not shorted them. She stopped by the church to leave a loaf for Reverend Phillips, who at least treated her with distant kindness, even if he sometimes looked at her like she was a test from God. Then she returned to the bakery to clean up and prepare for the next morning's baking. It was lonely work, but Zelda had convinced herself she preferred it that way. Alone, no one could hurt her. Alone, she did not have to see the disgust in people's eyes. But that night, as she lay in her narrow bed above the bakery, she could not stop thinking about Fletcher Cain. She could not stop remembering the way he had smiled at her, the way he had walked beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world, the way his voice had held no trace of mockery when he called her Miss Norton. She told herself she was being foolish, that she was setting herself up for heartbreak, but still she found herself hoping, just a little, that he would come back to the mercantile the next morning. And he did. Zelda saw him as soon as she turned onto Main Street with her basket of bread. He was leaning against the hitching post outside the mercantile, his paint horse tied nearby, and he straightened up when he saw her approaching. Her first instinct was to turn around and go the other way, but that was ridiculous. She had deliveries to make. She could not let one handsome cowboy disrupt her entire routine. "Morning, Miss Norton," Fletcher called out, tipping his hat to her. "I was hoping I'd catch you." "Morning," Zelda replied cautiously. She tried to walk past him, but once again he fell into step beside her, and once again she felt that confusing mixture of pleasure and panic at his attention. "I've been thinking about those sweet rolls all night," Fletcher said with a grin. "Barely slept, kept dreaming about cinnamon and sugar." "You could just buy more inside," Zelda pointed out, nodding toward the mercantile. "True," Fletcher agreed. "But then I wouldn't have an excuse to talk to you." Zelda stopped walking and stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Why would you want to talk to me?" Fletcher looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Why wouldn't I? You seem like an interesting person. You run your own business, you make incredible bread, and you're up before dawn working while half the town is still sleeping off their whiskey. That's admirable." "You don't know anything about me," Zelda said, and her voice came out sharper than she intended. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the moment when he would reveal that this was all some kind of joke or bet or cruel game. Men did not seek out her company. They just did not. "You're right," Fletcher said easily. "That's why I'd like to talk to you, to get to know you." "Why?" The question burst out of her, raw and desperate. "Why would you want to know me? Look at me. Just look at me." Fletcher did look at her, his gaze traveling from her face down to her twisted spine and back up again. Zelda braced herself for the revulsion, for the pity, for the awkward excuse and hasty retreat. But Fletcher just met her eyes and said, "I am looking at you. I see a woman who works harder than anyone else in this town. I see someone who holds her head up even when people try to beat her down. You stand taller than anyone I know." The words hit Zelda like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. She stood frozen on the muddy street, her basket of bread forgotten, staring at this cowboy who had just said the most absurd and wonderful thing anyone had ever said to her. Her eyes filled with tears, and she blinked furiously, refusing to let them fall. "That's ridiculous," she whispered. "I don't stand tall, I'm bent over, I'm crooked. Everyone knows it." "Everyone's a fool then," Fletcher said, and his voice was firm, brooking no argument. "I've known you for all of 24 hours, Miss Norton, and I can already see you've got more strength and courage in your little finger than most men have in their entire bodies. The way your spine curves doesn't change that, doesn't diminish it one bit." Zelda did not know what to say. She had no defense against kindness like this, no armor strong enough to deflect words that seemed to come from genuine admiration rather than pity. She opened her mouth and closed it again, then finally just shook her head and hurried into the mercantile before she could make a complete fool of herself by bursting into tears in the middle of the street. But Fletcher followed her inside. Of course he did, and he bought 4 sweet rolls and 2 loaves of bread directly from her basket, paying her far more than they were worth. When she tried to give him change, he closed her fingers around the coins and said, "Keep it. Call it payment for brightening up my morning." Over the next 2 weeks, Fletcher Cain became a fixture in Zelda's daily routine. He was always at the mercantile when she made her deliveries, always ready with a smile and a kind word and enough money to buy whatever she had left in her basket. They began to talk, tentatively at first, then with increasing ease. Fletcher told her about growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, about the years he had spent drifting from job to job across the West. Zelda told him about her father's bakery, about learning to make bread at her mother's elbow before she died, about the loneliness of running a business by herself in a town that would rather pretend she did not exist. Fletcher never once mentioned her spine. He never asked what had caused it or whether it caused her pain, though Zelda could have told him it did, especially on cold mornings when the mountain air settled into her bones. He never stared at her back or looked at her with pity. He just looked at her like she was a woman worth knowing, worth talking to, worth spending time with. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. The other people in town noticed, of course. Margaret Finch made snide comments about how desperate a man must be to court a cripple. A group of miners laughed openly when Fletcher walked Zelda back to her bakery one afternoon, his hand hovering protectively near the small of her back without quite touching. Even Samuel Wright, who had always been relatively kind to Zelda, pulled her aside one morning and said, "Be careful, girl. Young cowboys like that one don't stick around. He'll break your heart and move on to the next town before winter sets in." Zelda knew Samuel meant well, but his words haunted her. She had been thinking the same thing herself, trying to protect her heart even as Fletcher worked his way past every defense she had built up over the years. She knew this could not last. Men like Fletcher did not fall in love with women like her. He was handsome and kind and capable, the sort of man who could have his pick of pretty girls in any town he wandered through. Why would he choose someone whose body was bent and broken? But Fletcher kept coming back. He started showing up at the bakery in the evenings after his work at the Bennington Ranch was done, sitting at the small table in her kitchen while she prepared dough for the next morning. He talked to her about the horses he was training, about his dreams of maybe saving enough money to buy his own small spread someday. He asked her about her dreams, and Zelda found herself admitting things she had never said out loud before, that she wished she could expand the bakery, that she wished she had friends, that she wished she could go to one of the town dances without feeling like a spectacle. "Why don't you go?" Fletcher asked one evening, looking up from the coffee she had poured for him. "To the dances, I mean," Zelda laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because the moment I walk through those doors, everyone would stop and stare. They would whisper and point and make jokes. I've been through it before. I don't need to put myself through it again." "What if you didn't go alone?" Fletcher asked quietly. "What if you went with someone who would make sure nobody bothered you?" Zelda's heart started pounding. "Are you asking me to go to a dance with you?" "I suppose I am," Fletcher said, and now he looked uncertain for the first time since she had met him, like he was worried she might say no. "There's one next Saturday night at the church hall. I'd be honored if you'd let me escort you." "Fletcher," Zelda said, and she heard the tremor in her own voice. "You don't have to do that. You don't have to pity me." Fletcher set down his coffee cup with enough force to make it clatter against the saucer. "Is that what you think this is? Pity? What else would it be?" Zelda shot back, and now the tears she had been holding back for weeks threatened to spill over. "You've been coming here every day, buying my bread, talking to me, and I've been trying so hard not to read anything into it because I know better. I know what I am. I know what I look like. Do you?" Fletcher stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Because I don't think you do. I don't think you have any idea how amazing you are." "Amazing." Zelda nearly choked on the word. "I'm a cripple, Fletcher. I'm someone people laugh at and feel sorry for. I'm not amazing. I'm just trying to survive." "You're surviving by yourself in a town that treats you like dirt," Fletcher said, his voice rising with passion. "You're running a successful business alone. You're creating something beautiful every single day with your own two hands. You're kind and smart and funny, and yes, you're beautiful too, even if you can't see it." "My spine is crooked," Zelda said, and the words came out broken, barely more than a whisper. "I'm bent and twisted and ugly." Fletcher crossed the kitchen in 2 long strides and gently took her face in his hands, forcing her to look up at him. His eyes were blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You listen to me, Zelda Norton. I don't give a damn about your spine. I care about your heart, about your strength, about the way you smile when you talk about trying a new recipe. I care about the way you hum while you work, the way you're patient with people even when they don't deserve it, the way you make me want to be a better man. That's what I see when I look at you. Not your back, not your curve, not whatever the hell everyone else in this town is too blind to see past. I see you." A tear slipped down Zelda's cheek and Fletcher wiped it away with his thumb, his touch unbearably gentle. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm so scared of believing you, of letting myself hope, because when this ends, when you realize you could do so much better, it's going to destroy me." "It's not going to end," Fletcher said firmly. "And there is no better. There's just you, Zelda, just you." He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. Zelda had never been kissed before, had never even dreamed that someone would want to kiss her, and for a moment she was too shocked to respond. But then something inside her unfolded, like a flower that had been waiting years for sunlight, and she kissed him back with all the longing and hope and desperate need she had kept locked away for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "Come to the dance with me," he said. "Please. Let me show this whole town that you're mine, that I'm yours, that anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me." "Yes," Zelda whispered, because how could she say anything else? How could she deny herself this one chance at happiness, no matter how terrifying it was? "Yes, I'll go with you." The week leading up to the dance felt like a dream and a nightmare tangled together. Zelda could not stop thinking about Fletcher's kiss, about the way he had held her face so tenderly, about the fierce conviction in his voice when he said he saw her. But she also could not stop imagining all the ways the dance could go wrong, all the mockery and cruelty that would surely come her way when she walked into that hall on Fletcher's arm. Fletcher seemed to sense her anxiety. He came to the bakery every evening that week, helping her with chores she did not need help with, filling the small space with his easy laughter and constant reassurance. On Friday night, he brought her a dress that he said his mother had worn when she was young, packed away in a trunk all these years. It was a deep green color, simple but elegant, and when Zelda tried it on in her small bedroom, she was amazed to find that it fit almost perfectly, skimming over her curves in a way that somehow made her crooked spine less obvious. "You look beautiful," Fletcher said when she emerged shyly from the bedroom, and the reverence in his voice made her believe him, at least for a moment. Saturday arrived too quickly. Zelda spent the whole day in a state of nervous tension, burning a batch of bread because she was too distracted to pay attention. nearly cutting herself twice while slicing loaves. By the time evening came, and she heard Fletcher's knock at the door, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely button her dress. But when she opened the door and saw Fletcher standing there in his best shirt and vest, his hair combed back and his face freshly shaved, she felt some of her fear melt away. He looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and for the length of that look she let herself believe it. "Ready?" he asked, offering her his arm. "No," Zelda admitted, "but let's go anyway." The church hall was only 3 blocks from her bakery, but it felt like miles. Zelda could hear the music and laughter spilling out into the night, and with every step closer, her urge to turn and run grew stronger. But Fletcher kept his arm steady under hers, his presence solid and reassuring, and somehow she kept putting one foot in front of the other. The hall fell silent when they walked through the door. Every eye in the room turned to stare at them, and Zelda felt her face burn with humiliation. She heard the whispers starting, saw Margaret Finch's mouth drop open in shock, saw the miners nudging each other and pointing. She wanted to die. She wanted to disappear into the floor and never emerge again. But Fletcher just tightened his grip on her arm and led her straight into the center of the room, right onto the dance floor, as if they had every right in the world to be there. The band, after a moment of confused hesitation, struck up a waltz, and Fletcher, his hand firm on her waist, began to dance with her. Zelda had never danced before. She had no idea what she was doing, and her uneven gait made it even harder to follow the steps. But Fletcher was patient, guiding her through the movements, holding her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat steady against her chest. He smiled down at her, and in that moment, the rest of the room faded away. There was only the music, only the warmth of his hand on her waist, only the way he looked at her like she was everything he had ever wanted. The song ended, but Fletcher did not let her go. He led her through another dance, and then another, and gradually other couples began to join them on the floor. The whispers continued, but they were quieter now, less certain. Zelda caught sight of Reverend Phillips watching them with a small, approving smile. Even Samuel Wright gave her a respectful nod from where he stood with his wife near the refreshment table. Not everyone was pleased, of course. Margaret Finch and her friends made a show of laughing and pointing, and a group of young miners made crude comments that Zelda tried not to hear. But Fletcher heard them. Between one song and the next, he walked straight over to the miners and said something in a low, hard voice that made them all take a step back. Zelda could not hear what he said, but whatever it was, the miners scattered, suddenly very interested in finding drinks at the far end of the hall. "What did you tell them?" Zelda asked when Fletcher returned to her side. "Just explained some facts of life," Fletcher said mildly. "Nothing to worry about." They stayed at the dance until nearly midnight, and by the time Fletcher walked Zelda home through the quiet streets of Alta, she felt like a different person. She felt like someone who had the right to attend dances, to wear a pretty dress, to be courted by a handsome cowboy. She felt, for the first time in her life, like someone who might deserve happiness. At her door, Fletcher kissed her again, longer and deeper this time, his hands sliding into her hair. "I meant what I said," he murmured against her lips. "You're mine, Zelda. If you'll have me, I'm yours." "I'm yours," Zelda whispered back and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. "I've been yours since the moment you said I stand taller than anyone you know." Fletcher courted her properly after that. He came to Sunday dinners at her little apartment above the bakery, helping her cook and eating everything she put in front of him with genuine enthusiasm. He took her on long walks through the mountains surrounding Alta, showing her meadows full of wildflowers and streams so clear you could count the pebbles on the bottom. He introduced her to the people at the Bennington Ranch, where he worked, and they treated her with the same respect they showed Fletcher, as if her crooked spine was nothing worth remarking on. Slowly, grudgingly, the town of Alta began to change its opinion of Zelda Norton. It was hard to mock someone when a man like Fletcher Cain so clearly adored her. The whispers did not stop entirely, but they grew quieter, less vicious. People began to nod to her on the street, to say good morning, to compliment her bread without adding a cruel comment afterward. It was not perfect, but it was better than it had been, and Zelda found herself walking with her head held a little higher. Summer faded into autumn, and the aspen trees on the mountainsides turned gold and orange. Fletcher started talking about the future, about what would happen when winter came and work at the ranch slowed down. He wanted to stay in Alta, he said, wanted to build something permanent instead of drifting from town to town like he had done for years. He talked about maybe buying a small piece of land, raising horses, having a place of his own. And when he talked about these dreams, he always said, "we" instead of "I," including Zelda in every plan like it was the most natural thing in the world. One evening in late October, as they sat together on the small porch outside her bakery watching the sun set behind the mountains, Fletcher said, "I love you, Zelda." The words hung in the cool air between them, enormous and wonderful and terrifying. Zelda turned to look at him, at this man who had changed her entire world in just a few short months. "You love me," she repeated, needing to hear it again, needing to be sure. "I love you," Fletcher confirmed, taking her hand in his. "I love your strength and your kindness and your terrible sense of humor. I love the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating on getting a recipe just right. I love waking up in the morning knowing I get to see you. I love every single thing about you, including the parts you think are broken." "I'm not broken?" Zelda asked, and heard the question in her own voice, the uncertainty that still lingered despite everything. "No," Fletcher said firmly. "You're not broken. You're perfect exactly as you are, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you if you'll let me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring, the band worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's," he said. "The only thing I have left of her. I know I don't have much to offer you, Zelda. I'm just a cowboy with a few dollars saved and dreams that might never come true. But I promise I will work every day to make you happy, to make you feel as treasured as you deserve to feel. Will you marry me?" Zelda looked at the ring, at Fletcher's hopeful face, at the sunset painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She thought about all the years she had spent believing she would always be alone, believing that love was something other people got to experience but never her. She thought about how wrong she had been, how this wonderful man had walked into her life and refused to see her the way everyone else did. She thought about the future they could build together, the life they could make, despite all the people who thought she did not deserve it. "Yes," she said, and felt joy burst through her like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Yes, Fletcher Cain, I will marry you." Fletcher slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting all these years just for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her until she was breathless and laughing and crying all at once, until the sun had fully set and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. They were married a month later, on a cold November morning in the little church where Zelda had delivered bread every week for years. Reverend Phillips performed the ceremony, and Samuel Wright stood up as Fletcher's witness, while the owner of the hotel, Mrs. Patterson, stood with Zelda. It was a small wedding, simple and quick, but to Zelda it was perfect. She wore the green dress Fletcher had given her, and he wore his best clothes, and when he said his vows, his voice rang clear and strong through the small church. "I promise to love you every day," Fletcher said, holding both her hands in his. I promise to stand beside you when times are hard and celebrate with you when they're good. I promise to see you the way you truly are, not the way the world tries to tell you you should be. I promise to spend the rest of my life making you happy, Zelda Norton, soon to be Zelda Cain. Zelda's own vows were shorter, choked with emotion. I promise to love you with everything I have, she managed. I promise to believe you when you tell me I'm beautiful, to trust you when you say you see me. I promise to build a life with you, to make a home with you, to stand by your side no matter what comes. You saved me, Fletcher. You showed me I was worth saving. I love you. When Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her like they were the only two people in the world, like he did not care that there were witnesses watching, like he had no shame in showing everyone exactly how much he loved his crooked spine bride. The few people who had attended the ceremony clapped politely, and Mrs. Patterson wiped tears from her eyes. Even Margaret Finch, who had come out of curiosity more than goodwill, looked grudgingly impressed. Zelda knew the talk would continue, knew that some people would always look at her and Fletcher and whisper about the cowboy who married the cripple. But for the first time, she found that she did not care. Let them talk. She had Fletcher and Fletcher had her, and that was enough. They spent their wedding night in Zelda's small apartment above the bakery, which would now become Fletcher's home too. He carried her up the stairs despite her protests that she was too heavy, that her weight was unevenly distributed, that he would hurt his back. Fletcher just laughed and held her closer, taking the stairs two at a time like she weighed nothing at all. In the privacy of their bedroom, Fletcher undressed her slowly, reverently, kissing every inch of skin he uncovered. When he reached her back, he traced the curve of her spine with his fingers, so gentle it made her shiver. "Beautiful," he murmured. "Every part of you is beautiful." Zelda had been terrified of this moment, afraid that when Fletcher finally saw all of her, when there were no more layers of clothing to hide behind, he would be repulsed. But there was only love in his eyes, only desire and tenderness and awe. He made love to her like she was precious, like she was something to be cherished, and Zelda finally understood that he meant every word he had ever said to her. He truly saw her as beautiful. He truly loved her, crooked spine and all. Afterward, they lay tangled together in her narrow bed, Fletcher's arms wrapped protectively around her, his chin resting on top of her head. "I'm the luckiest man alive," he said into the darkness. "I hope you know that." "I think I'm the lucky one," Zelda replied, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingers. "I never thought I could have this. I never thought anyone would want me." "Then everyone else is an idiot," Fletcher said firmly. "And I'm grateful for every single one of them, because it meant you were still here waiting for me when I finally found you." Winter came to Alta with a vengeance, bringing snow that piled up to the windowsills and temperatures that made the bakery's ovens feel like a blessing instead of a burden. Fletcher had moved into the apartment fully now, his few possessions mingling with Zelda's in a way that felt both strange and perfectly right. He continued to work at the Bennington Ranch when the weather allowed, riding out before dawn and returning after dark. But he always came home to her, always kissed her like he had been gone for weeks instead of hours. On days when the snow was too deep for him to make the ride to the ranch, Fletcher helped Zelda in the bakery. He was not much of a baker, but he could carry heavy sacks of flour, could stoke the ovens to the right temperature, could knead dough with his strong hands when Zelda's back was aching too much to do it herself. They worked side by side in companionable silence, or sometimes talking about their plans for the future, about the horse ranch Fletcher still dreamed of starting, about maybe expanding the bakery to include more fancy pastries and cakes. Christmas came, and Fletcher gave Zelda a beautiful shawl he had ordered from Denver, soft wool in a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Zelda gave him a new hat to replace the battered one he had been wearing since Wyoming, and a tin of ginger cookie she had made specially for him. They spent the day alone together, cooking a modest dinner and sitting by the fire, content in each other's company. As winter deepened, Zelda began to realize she was pregnant. The signs were subtle at first, a certain tenderness in her breasts, a wave of nausea that hit her every morning when she went to start the ovens. But as January turned to February, there was no denying it. She was carrying Fletcher's child, a thought that filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had always assumed she would never have children, that her body was too damaged, too wrong to carry a baby safely. But Dr. Morrison, the physician who served Alta and the surrounding ranches, examined her and declared that while it might be uncomfortable given the curve in her spine, there was no reason she could not deliver a healthy child. "Women's bodies are tougher than most people give them credit for," he said with a kind smile. "You'll do just fine, Mrs. Cain." When Zelda told Fletcher the news, he picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, whooping with joy. "A baby," he kept saying, his face split in the widest smile she had ever seen. "We're going to have a baby. Zelda, that's the best news I've ever heard in my life." "You're not worried?" Zelda asked, because she was worried enough for both of them. "About my spine, about whether I can handle it?" "I'm not worried," Fletcher said, setting her down gently and cupping her face in his hands. "You're the strongest person I know, remember? You can handle anything, and I'm going to be right here beside you every step of the way." The pregnancy was hard, as Dr. Morrison had predicted. Zelda's back ached constantly as her belly grew, the additional weight pulling on her already curved spine in ways that sometimes left her breathless with pain. There were days when she could barely stand, when Fletcher had to do all the baking himself, following her instructions from where she sat in a chair, her hands pressed against her lower back. But through it all, Fletcher was patient and loving, never once complaining about the extra work, never once making her feel like she was a burden. Spring came slowly to the mountains, and as the snow melted and wildflowers began to push through the damp earth, Zelda's belly continued to swell. The women of Alta, who had mostly ignored her before, began to take an interest in her pregnancy. Mrs. Patterson brought over baby clothes her own children had outgrown. Even Margaret Finch stopped by the bakery one day with a basket of knitted blankets, though she could not quite meet Zelda's eyes when she handed them over. "Every baby needs blankets," she mumbled, and left before Zelda could properly thank her. Fletcher used his savings to buy a cradle from a carpenter in town, a beautiful piece of work made from pine and polished until it glowed. He set it up in their bedroom and spent hours working on it, carving delicate patterns into the wood, making it perfect for their child. Zelda would sit and watch him work, her hands resting on her belly, feeling their baby kick and roll inside her, and she would feel a contentment so deep it almost scared her. This was happiness, real and solid and more than she had ever dared to dream of. The baby came in early June, on a morning when the sun was just beginning to touch the peaks of the mountains. Zelda's water broke while she was kneading bread, and the labor came fast and hard after that, so intense that she thought she might die from it. Fletcher sent for Dr. Morrison and stayed by her side through the entire ordeal, holding her hand and letting her squeeze it until his fingers went white, murmuring encouragement and love even when she screamed at him that this was all his fault. After 12 hours of labor, their son was born, tiny and red and squalling at the top of his lungs. Dr. Morrison placed the baby on Zelda's chest, and she looked down at her son's wrinkled face and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. He was perfect, with dark hair like Fletcher's and tiny fingers that immediately gripped her thumb with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" Fletcher asked, his voice choked with emotion as he looked down at his wife and newborn son. "William," Zelda said immediately, thinking of her father. "William Thomas Cain." "William," Fletcher repeated, testing the name. "That's perfect. Hello, William. Welcome to the world, son." Those first weeks with William were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. The baby wanted to eat constantly, and Zelda was so tired she could barely think straight. But Fletcher was there for all of it, changing diapers, walking William around the apartment when he would not sleep, taking over the bakery entirely so Zelda could rest. He was a natural father, patient and gentle, singing off key lullabies and making silly faces that eventually would make William smile. Summer passed in a blur of feedings and diapers, and the profound joy of watching their son grow. William was a healthy baby, strong and loud, and Zelda marveled every day that she and Fletcher had created this perfect little person. The town of Alta seemed to soften even more toward her now that she was a mother. Customers would stop by the bakery to coo over William, to bring little gifts, to offer advice. It was not perfect acceptance, but it was more than Zelda had ever expected to receive. In late summer, Fletcher came home from the Bennington ranch with exciting news. Old Mr. Bennington was retiring and moving back east to live with his daughter, and he was selling off portions of the ranch. Fletcher had been offered first chance to buy a section of land, 50 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, at a price he could afford with his savings, and a loan from the bank in Salt Lake City. "It's everything we talked about," Fletcher said, his eyes shining with excitement as he bounced William in his arms. "We could build a house, start raising horses, really make something of ourselves. What do you think, Zelda? Should we do it?" Zelda looked at her husband holding their son, at the hope and ambition in his face, and knew there was only one answer. "Yes," she said. "Let's build our dream." The next year was one of intense work and planning. Fletcher bought the land and immediately began clearing a spot for a house. He hired a few men from town to help, and together they built a modest but sturdy home. 2 stories with a big kitchen for Zelda and a barn for the horses Fletcher planned to raise. The house was situated at the base of a mountain, with a view of the entire valley spread out before it, the creek running silver through the grass. They moved out of the apartment above the bakery in the spring of 1880, when William was nearly a year old and just learning to walk. Zelda sold the bakery to a young couple from back east, who promised to keep her recipes and maintain the quality that her customers had come to expect. It was bittersweet, leaving behind the business she had built by herself, but she was ready for this new chapter, ready to help Fletcher build something together. The ranch was hard work, harder than anything Zelda had ever done before. Fletcher bought a few horses and began training them to sell, working from dawn until well past dark most days. Zelda kept the house, tended a large garden that fed them through the winter, and cared for William, who was growing into a bright, energetic toddler. Her back still ached, especially after long days of work, but she found that the pain was easier to bear when she was doing something she loved, when she was building a life with people who loved her in return. 2 years after William was born, Zelda found herself pregnant again. This time she was less frightened, more confident in her body's ability to handle the demands of pregnancy. This labor was easier than the first, and in March of 1881, she delivered a healthy baby girl with Fletcher's dark eyes and Zelda's stubborn chin. They named her Rose, after the wild roses that grew along the creek every summer. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm. Fletcher's reputation as a horse trainer grew, and men came from all over Utah and even from neighboring states to buy his animals. The ranch prospered, not making them wealthy but providing enough that they never had to worry about food or shelter or whether they could pay their debts. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved to follow his father around and learn everything about horses. Rose was her mother's daughter, stubborn and fierce and utterly unafraid of anything. The years passed, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Alta continued to grow as the silver mines expanded and more families moved into the area. The Cains were respected members of the community now, their ranch a landmark that everyone knew. Zelda sometimes thought about how different her life had become from what she had expected as a young woman hunched over her father's ovens, believing she would always be alone. The transformation felt like a miracle she still did not quite believe in. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Zelda on a picnic to a meadow high in the mountains, the same place he had taken her when they were first courting. William and Rose were old enough now to stay with Mrs. Patterson in town for the day, and it felt strange and wonderful to have time alone with her husband, just the two of them like it had been in the beginning. They sat on a blanket overlooking the valley, eating fried chicken and fresh bread and the raspberry tarts Zelda had made that morning. The summer sun was warm on their faces, and the breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. Fletcher lay back on the blanket and pulled Zelda down beside him, tucking her against his side like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. "You remember the first time I saw you?" Fletcher asked, his fingers playing idly with her hair. "Walking down the street with your basket of bread, trying so hard to be invisible." "I remember," Zelda said. "I remember thinking you were going to be like everyone else, that you were going to mock me or pity me. I remember thinking you were the most interesting person I had seen in months," Fletcher said. "The way you held your head up even though people were being cruel, the way you kept going even when it would have been easier to give up. I knew right then that I wanted to know you." "You told me I stand taller than anyone you know," Zelda said softly. "That was the moment everything changed for me. That was when I started to believe I might deserve happiness." "You deserve everything good in this world," Fletcher said, rolling over to look down at her, his expression serious. "Every single good thing, Zelda. I hope you know that now. I hope I've proven it to you over these 10 years. "You have," Zelda assured him, reaching up to touch his face to trace the lines that sun and hard work had etched around his eyes. "You've given me a life I never dreamed was possible. You've given me love and children and a home where I feel safe. You've made me believe I'm beautiful, even on the days when my back hurts so much I can barely move. You've given me everything." Fletcher kissed her then, slow and deep and full of the love that had only grown stronger over the years. "I'm not done yet," he murmured against her lips. "I plan to spend the next 50 years giving you even more." They made love there in the meadow, under the wide blue sky, with only the mountains as witnesses. It was sweet and familiar and still exciting after all these years, and when they lay tangled together afterward, Zelda felt the same overwhelming joy she had felt on their wedding night. This was her life now. This beautiful, impossible, wonderful life. More years passed, and the children continued to grow. William turned into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with a gift for gentling even the wildest horses. Rose became a force of nature, fearless and outspoken, determined to make her own way in the world. In 1889, when Zelda was 33 years old, she was surprised to find herself pregnant again. She had assumed Rose would be their last child, but clearly fate had other plans. This pregnancy was harder than the others. She was older now, and her body had been through so much already. But when their second son was born in early 1890, A tiny baby with a head full of red gold hair unlike either of his parents, Zelda fell in love all over again. They named him James, and he turned out to be the happiest baby any of them had ever seen, always smiling, always content. The ranch continued to prosper, and Fletcher was finally able to buy more land, expanding their holdings to nearly 200 acres. They built a bigger house, with enough room for their growing children and the guests who increasingly came to visit. Alta was no longer a rough mining town but a real community, with schools and churches and even a small library. The Cain family was at the center of it all, respected and admired. Zelda's back never stopped hurting, and some days were worse than others. As she got older, the curve in her spine became more pronounced, and she moved more slowly, more carefully. But she never let it stop her from living fully, from riding out to check on the horses with Fletcher, from playing with her children, from being part of the community that had finally learned to accept her. She had learned long ago that strength was not about having a perfect body, but about having the courage to keep going despite the pain. On a warm evening in June of 1895, the Cain family gathered on the porch of their house to celebrate William's 16th birthday. He was nearly a man now, talking about his plans to start his own horse training business in partnership with his father. Rose, at 14, was already catching the eye of young men in town, though she seemed more interested in learning to rope and ride than in any of them. James, a sturdy 5-year-old, was chasing fireflies in the grass with a jar, his laughter ringing through the dusk. Fletcher sat beside Zelda on the porch swing he had built for her, his arm around her shoulders, their bodies fitting together perfectly after nearly 17 years of marriage. They watched their children play, watched the sun set behind the mountains, and Zelda felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. "What are you thinking about?" Fletcher asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "How lucky I am," Zelda said simply. "How impossibly, incredibly lucky." "I'm the lucky one," Fletcher countered, but he was smiling. They had had this argument countless times over the years, each of them insisting they were the fortunate one, neither ever conceding. "You ever regret it?" Zelda asked, a question she had not asked in years but still sometimes wondered about. "Choosing me when you could have had someone easier, someone whole." Fletcher turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "Zelda Cain, you listen to me. You are whole. You've always been whole. And choosing you was the easiest decision I ever made. You're the love of my life, the mother of my children, my best friend and partner in everything. I wouldn't change a single thing about you or about us. Do you understand me?" Zelda nodded, feeling tears prick her eyes the way they always did when Fletcher said things like this, even after all these years. "I understand," she whispered. "I love you, Fletcher Cain." "I love you too," Fletcher said, and kissed her like they were young again, like they were back at that first dance when he had held her in front of the whole town and showed everyone that she was his. The years continued to roll by, bringing more changes and challenges. William did start his own business, becoming known throughout the territory as one of the best horse trainers around. Rose, stubborn and independent as ever, became a teacher at the school in Alta, determined to give children a better education than she had received. She also finally accepted the courtship of a quiet but kind young man named Daniel Peterson. And in 1901, she was married in the same church where Zelda and Fletcher had said their vows 20 years earlier. James grew into a thoughtful young man with a talent for mathematics and a dream of attending university back east. Fletcher and Zelda saved carefully to make that dream possible, and in 1905, they put him on a train to Boston, where he had been accepted to study engineering. It was hard to watch him go, but they were so proud of him, of all their children, of the people they had become. As the new century began, Alta changed even more. The silver mines began to play out, and the town's economy shifted toward timber and ranching. But the Cain Ranch remained strong, built on hard work and Fletcher's reputation for honesty and quality. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and that was enough. In 1908, when Zelda was 52 years old and Fletcher was nearing 55, they became grandparents for the first time. Rose delivered a healthy baby boy she and Daniel named Thomas, after Zelda's father. Holding her grandson for the first time, Zelda thought about how her father would have loved this, would have loved seeing how far his daughter had come from that frightened girl bent over the bakery ovens. More grandchildren followed, and the Cain house was frequently filled with the sound of children's laughter. William married a sweet woman named Elizabeth and had 4 children in quick succession. James eventually returned from Boston with a degree and a wife, settling in Salt Lake City, but visiting Alta often. The family grew and flourished, rooted in the love that Fletcher and Zelda had built together all those years ago. They grew old together, Fletcher's dark hair turning silver, Zelda's back becoming even more bent until she walked with a cane most days. But they still sat together on the porch every evening, still held hands like young lovers, still looked at each other like they had that very first morning when Fletcher had ridden up beside her on the muddy street of Alta and asked if she was being troubled. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, Fletcher stood up to make a toast. His hands shook slightly with age, but his voice was still strong. 40 years ago, I rode into Alta not knowing a soul, not having any idea what my life would become, he said. And then I saw a woman carrying a basket of bread, and everything changed. Zelda, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You're the strongest, bravest, most beautiful person I've ever known. You stand taller than anyone I know, and I'm honored to have spent these 40 years at your side. Here's to 40 more. Everyone cheered and raised their glasses, and Zelda wiped away tears of joy. She looked around at all the faces gathered in her home, at the family she and Fletcher had created together, at the life they had built from nothing but love and determination, and the refusal to believe what cruel people said about them. She thought about that young woman she had been, bent over and mocked, believing she would always be alone. She wished she could go back and tell that woman what was waiting for her, tell her that everything was going to be better than she ever dreamed. But then she looked at Fletcher, at her husband of 40 years, and she knew that young woman would not have believed it anyway. Some things you had to live to understand, to experience yourself before you could accept them as real. Love was like that. Happiness was like that. The knowledge that you were worthy, exactly as you were, was like that. Fletcher and Zelda lived many more years together, growing older but never losing the deep connection that had drawn them together in the first place. They sat on their porch and watched the seasons change, winter giving way to spring, spring to summer, summer to fall, the cycle repeating year after year. They watched their grandchildren grow up and have children of their own, watched the family tree they had planted together spread branches in every direction. On a warm evening in late June of 1923, as the sun set behind the familiar peaks of the Wasatch Mountains, Zelda and Fletcher sat together on their porch swing for the last time. They were both old now, Fletcher nearly 70 and Zelda just past 67, their bodies worn from decades of hard work and hard living. But they held hands like they always had, their fingers intertwined, and they watched the fireflies begin to dance in the grass. "Do you remember," Fletcher said quietly, "the first time I told you that you stand taller than anyone I know? I remember everything, Zelda said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Every moment of these 45 years. Every single one." "Good," Fletcher said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Because they've been the best years of my life. Every single one." They sat in comfortable silence as the darkness deepened, as the stars began to appear in the vast sky above them. Somewhere in the house, their family was gathered, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. But for now, it was just the two of them, the cowboy and his crooked spine bride, the same as it had always been, the same as it would always be. Fletcher died peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks later, with Zelda holding his hand and his children gathered around his bed. Zelda followed him 3 months after that, as if she could not bear to be without him for long. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, under a shared headstone that reads simply, "Fletcher and Zelda Cain." They stood tall together. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build together when they refused to accept the world's judgment of them. The story of the cowboy who fell in love with the baker girl with the crooked spine became a family legend, told and retold to children who needed to understand that true love sees past physical imperfections to the strength and beauty that lies beneath. That kindness matters more than appearances. That courage is sometimes found in the simple act of choosing to love someone despite what everyone else says. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew down from the mountains and through the valley, the descendants of Fletcher and Zelda Cain would swear they could still hear the creak of the old porch swing, still feel the presence of two souls who had loved each other so completely that even death could not truly separate them. They had stood together against a world that told them they did not belong together, and they had won. They had built a life, a family, a legacy that would endure long after their bodies returned to the mountain soil. In the end, what mattered was not the curve in Zelda's spine or the whispers of cruel people or the hardships they had faced. What mattered was that Fletcher had seen her, truly seen her, and had loved what he saw. What mattered was that Zelda had found the courage to believe him, to let herself be loved, to stand as tall as he always said she did. What mattered was that they had found each other in that dusty mining town in the mountains of Utah, and they had chosen each other every single day after that, for the rest of their lives. Their story became part of the history of Alta, woven into the fabric of the community like gold thread through ordinary cloth. And when people walked past the old Cain ranch, past the weathered house and the barn that still stood strong after more than a century, they would remember the cowboy and his bride, and they would understand that love, real love, sees not with the eyes but with the heart. That true beauty has nothing to do with how straight your spine grows. That standing tall is a matter of courage and character, not inches and angles. Fletcher and Zelda Cain had proven that, had lived that truth every day of their long life together. And their legacy, built on that foundation of unwavering love and mutual respect, would endure for generations to come. A beacon of hope for anyone who had ever been told they were not worthy, not beautiful, not enough. They were proof that the world could be wrong, that happiness was possible even when everyone said it was not, that love could flourish in the most unexpected places if you were brave enough to reach for it. And so the story ends where it began, with a crooked spine woman and a kind-eyed cowboy, with whispers and cruelty transformed into love and legacy, with one simple truth that echoed through the years. Sometimes the people who stand tallest are the ones the world tries hardest to bring low, and sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones nobody expected to happen at all.